And we're back with the show. This is the Pop Culture Cosmos. My name is Gerald Glassford from Pop Culture Cosmos and Game Source. We truly appreciate you being, again, part of the broadcast here today. And don't forget, if you download or stream the show on over a dozen of our streaming and podcasting options, remember, you always get bonus content that always comes as a little package of love right here from the Pop Culture Cosmos. Well, it's week 2 in the NFL's just about over, and everything's pretty much wrapped up in a nice, tidy little bow, and everything looks real. We're actually starting to feel out some of the teams and how they're progressing, and who better to break down just for a few minutes here everything that went on in the week 2 in the NFL than my good friend. He is the man in the know when it comes to fantasy football. He is Tyler Baker of the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast, which you can catch today on Libsyn, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Overcast.fm, and Player.fm. Tyler, it's always good to have you on the show, my friend.
It's a pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me.
Indeed. And, well, I guess, first off, I was kind of worried. I thought he had reached a wall. I thought Giselle had just, maybe sent him over the edge into old age, so to speak. But Tom Brady came back strong again, over 400 yards, touchdowns, and I think I can see and almost see collectively thousands of fantasy football holders and teams and owners have a collective sigh of relief. Correct?
Yes. How often do the Patriots lose 2 games in a row? And how often does Tom Brady have 2 bad games in a row? It does not happen very often. And man, he put an exclamation mark on it today, completed 30 of 39 passes. Out of 39 passes, he completed 30 of them for 447 yards and 3 touchdowns. That is amazing. So he's back.
Well, and also as well, it clearly defines the Saints defense as really being porous. Ooh, so and just my novice fantasy football self, but I'm sure you're going to probably tell everybody on your Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday podcasts that are going to be available this week that, again, if you are playing against the New Orleans defense, that's a sell. That's a sell, right?
That is a defense to target. It sure is. And there are a couple more that I'm going to highlight this week. I haven't watched all of the game film yet because there were a lot of games today, but I'm going to go through all of those. And now that we have a couple of games in, we have a good indication of who these teams are. Now, there were some injuries today that are going to further define these teams. And a couple of those important ones, Corey Coleman, wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns, broke his hand. Greg Olsen, the star tight end in Carolina, he broke his foot. They don't know how long he's going to be out. Randall Cobb hurt himself again.
Gronkowski hurt a groin, I believe, as well. We don't know anything on the status of it. I just know at this point in time he did hurt his groin. He did have to leave the game.
He did leave the game. After the game, he told the reporters he was fine, but, we'll see. It didn't sound serious, but yeah, he had to leave the game. Also, Redskins running back Fat Rob Kelly, it looks like he might have fractured a rib, and that opened the door for rookie Samaje Perine to come in and get some reps, and he looked pretty good. And then Jordan Howard, the star running back for the Chicago Bears, he was dealing with a shoulder injury throughout the week, and he was limited in practice because when a running back has a shoulder injury, you want to take it easy because he leads with his shoulders. Well, he was seen after the game with his arm in a sling. So that was not good. And there were a couple of other minor injuries, but those are the big ones that could really change the dynamics of these teams, especially when you're talking about a guy like Greg Olsen. He is a very big part of what they do. He has had 3,000-yard receiving seasons in a row. That is unheard of for a tight end. So that's a very big chunk of that offense that isn't going to be there. And in my show on Tuesday, I'm going to go through who we need to add and who we need to be looking at, who is going to come in and absorb that production that Greg Olsen is going to leave behind.
Oh, that's definitely some great updates indeed. That is, again, Tyler Baker of the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast. Again, you got to catch it on Libsyn, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Player.fm, and also as well overcast.fm as well. And just type in the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast. Plus also he runs a great Facebook group too, also named the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast, where you can submit, hey, Tyler, can you take a look at my lineup? Is that going to work? Or, hey, I want to pick up this guy, or should I drop that guy? You know what? You can ask all those questions. I see him all week long answering all the fans and all the team owners out there that do ask those questions. He answers them all week long for you in that Facebook group. That is Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast. Right there, that group. I'll tell you what, he's answered a couple of mine as well. And I'll tell you, his picks are great.
I love it.
His picks have done great for me so far, because looks like I'm about ready to go 2-0. So I definitely that's great indeed.
I've been telling all of your listeners to keep an eye on Chris Carson, the rookie running back in Seattle. Now, even though it's a terrible offensive line, and even though he has Eddie Lacy and Thomas Rawls ahead of him, he actually got the majority of the work today. And it looks like moving forward that he is going to be the guy there. Now, granted, it's not the best situation, but he sure made the best of it today. He, let me get his stats real quick. He had 20 rushes for 93 yards. That is pretty good for a guy playing behind an awful offensive line. And we've been talking about him for a couple of weeks now on your show, and he finally started making his move.
That's, again, awesome to hear. Again, you got to check his stuff out. Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast, both the podcast and the Facebook group, and you'll get hints like this. But there's something before we head on out. I got to ask you something that I see trending that, for me, as someone who loves offensive football, is kind of disturbing, but it also gives people a chance to focus on some other parts of the game where they can make up ground if they don't have exactly the greatest players up front as far as their flex, their wide receivers, or their running backs are concerned. And that is in the area of defense, because as you and I have both seen, there are some combinations, some pretty bad offenses, and
yes.
B, there's some really good defenses out there that are scoring a lot of points. So I ask you, Tyler, is this a case where there's some really, really bad offenses more often, or are the defenses just turning it up a notch in these several cases where we've seen some pretty outstanding defensive performances?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest factor, at least in the beginning of this season, is that there are a lot of rookie quarterbacks, and there are a lot of guys playing quarterbacks like Scott Tolzien and guys that are just turnover prone. And
Deshaun Kaiser today, the Browns, he threw 3 interceptions.
Exactly.
Hogan, I think his backup threw an interception as well. So when the Browns play pitch and catch, I guess, with the other team, that also helps a lot as well.
Yeah. And there are some good defenses that are presenting themselves. Now, Jacksonville gave up quite a few points today, but that is a defense that has always been poised to make a big step. They've had they put a lot of early round draft capital into that defense, and it's looking like those guys are starting to come together. Baltimore's defense is kind of under the radar. They are very aggressive. Now, the problem with those two defenses is that their offenses don't help them out a lot. In the same way with the Giants defense, if the offense isn't spending time on the field, that defense can get tired. And so when you're talking about streaming defenses, which is something that I will touch on in this week's waiver wire report, is defenses that you can pick. You don't have to draft a defense on your fantasy team and just keep them all year. You can switch them out. You can find good matchups. And that is probably a very good strategy to have going forward in this season, because those defenses that we thought were going to be great, like the Arizona Cardinals, they're just not that good. So unless you have, like, Denver's defense is great. Seattle's defense is great when the offense can keep them off the field all the time. But I think streaming defenses is probably something that people might consider. So if you have a defense that is facing, let's say, Cincinnati, who has a terrible offensive line and has yet to score a touchdown this year, if you can pick up a defense that has a good defensive front, like those first 5 guys up front that can put pressure on the quarterback, that is probably going to be a defense that you want to target for your fantasy matchups.
That's some great advice indeed. Once again, it's Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast. Catch it every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, or beforehand if you want to get those episodes earlier. That is going to be available again on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Libsyn, Overcast.fm, and Player.fm as well. Tyler, I'm looking forward to when we talk to you again for the Friday show, and you give us an update on who to talk about for week 3 in the NFL.
It's wonderful being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And as always, we appreciate you being part of the Pop Culture Cosmos.